Well, hello, everyone. It is myself, Jeff Black, the always smug and beautiful looking Brandon DeCruz. He likes it when I call him out like that. Don't let him confuse you. But we are Chasing Clarity Health and Fitness Podcast. Today, episode 81, Individualized Training Program Design. So we're going to talk probably a little bit more about the follow-up after Scott Stevenson, which was an amazing episode. If you haven't heard it, go back and listen to it because it was really, really good. The importance of taking evidence-based or an evidence-based and personalized approach to programming. You mean I just can't go do 50 sets of something and hope for the best? But
I mean, you can, my friend, but I won't be doing that with other
I
clients.
mean,
That's all I'm saying.
yeah, fair enough. Well, anyway, let's get into like our last 7 days. How was your last 7 days been, Mr. Brandon?
Yeah, man. Honestly, it's been a solid week on my end. Just this past week, actually, I just wrapped up a building phase that I've been in for approximately like 5+ months, maybe 5.5 months at this point. And I also, throughout that time, I was running a DELT specialization cycle, which we covered months ago when I first went into this specialization cycle, and essentially the purpose of it, what I was doing, how I was allocating volume as well as frequency. So this past Monday, actually, I just started a mini cut, which I'm planning to run for approximately like 4.5 weeks. And the reason, usually I'm a very even person. I'm very numerically oriented.
Yeah.
I'm very analytical, but I'm doing 4.5 weeks because that'll allow me to end it right before the Thanksgiving holiday, which is next month. And so throughout the last 5 months or so, I've been running both higher training volumes alongside eating, 4,000 plus calories per day. And last month, and I'm just trying to give a little bit of a reason behind the mini cut, or the reason as to why I'm transitioning into this and why I use this phasic approach to building to cutting, and this ratio of like essentially a 4-to-1 paradigm of building phases to cutting phases, is because, I had gotten to the point this last month where my appetite was just shot, man. It gets super low at a certain point. Once I'm pushing like past 600 grams of carbohydrates per day, I very rarely have an appetite, and I would just have to eat. I would just have to put on hyperpalatable or put hyperpalatable food into my diet to be able to eat more calories. And that to me isn't worth it from a digestion perspective, from a health perspective, metabolic health perspective. And so, with that, once I'm pushing that amount of calories, once I get past 4,000 calories, I'm already in the 41 to 4,200 calorie mark. My digestion starts taking a hit and it gets impacted. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to utilize this mini cut phase as an opportunity to pull back on food. I'm going to try to quickly peel off some body fat that I've accrued during this building phase. And then by doing so, I'm going to have bought myself some runway so that I can transition right back into a building phase once the holiday season is here and once I finish this mini cut. And so that's what I'm doing on like a training nutrition end. But besides that, man, I got to tell you, I don't know if we've ever discussed this, but one of my favorite holidays and favorite parts of the year is the fall. So I love Halloween. This is like one of the number one holidays that my family used to celebrate. My mom was huge into horror movies. So she got me like watching like Freddy Krueger like when I'm 4 years old. So her biggest rationale behind that, she tells me now, and she's told me this throughout my adolescence, was she never wanted me to be scared of anything. There was a lot, I had friends that they're 18 years old and we're watching a horror movie and they're like hiding under blankets, and that just I was exposed to this early, so I've become a huge fan of it. So I'm a huge fan of horror movies first and foremost. And this is actually the one time of the year I never go to movies. I don't watch television. I haven't had cable since 2012. I very rarely watch movies or Netflix or anything of that sort, but always I make sure that I will scout out. So I have to look it up online because I don't watch, cable television. I don't watch commercials, all that kind of stuff. I see personally as a distraction. Um, but I went this weekend and I saw one of the newest horror releases, which was Saw 10. And I got to give it up to them, man. I don't know if you've watched the Saw series, but they started in the early 2000s. And this is number 10, man. This is X. And I was actually like pretty impressed, man. It's pretty damn good for being like the 10th version, because if you're familiar with any series, like think about any series that you look at, Fast and Furious, Star Wars, things like that. Like even these legacy series, like by like 4 or 5, they start going downhill. It takes a nosedive. But honestly, they did a really good job with this. It was a solid 10th edition to the series. And so, I was happy to go out there and see it. And we're 1 week out from Halloween as we're recording this. So this is my time. I really enjoy this. This is like the last, few weeks where we're going to have nice weather. Like right now it's like 40 degrees in Jersey, but apparently we're supposed to get 70 degrees this weekend. So I'm going to take full advantage, going to go hiking this weekend and do some outdoor activities for probably the last time, in Jersey for this time of the year. And then I will be hitting probably pretty cold front coming through. How about you, my man?
Well, I will be dressed up next Tuesday when you're a podcast.
Let's go.
Um,
But
yeah,
what are you going to wear?
I'm
That's what
not
I want to
telling
know.
you. It's a
All
surprise.
right. All right.
A
I'll be looking
surprise.
forward to it.
My alternate character will be taking over that week.
Oh Lord.
Yeah. Oh man. So last week has been good. Started working on a new book project. kind of like trying to flesh it out. I've been really trying to think about what I wanted to write, as Steven told me I should keep going. So I was like, well, screw it. So I came up with that. Then I went to Alabama and saw
All right.
Tennessee play Alabama, and they choke after the absolute first half, which horrible to see. It broke my heart. But the people down there were really, really nice, man. I only had one weird encounter in the bathroom with a man, and didn't last long before a really tall black man got involved. So yeah, weird time. But anyway, otherwise my last 7 days have been good, man. I think it's been quiet for me. Like, this time of the year, I think it kind of gets quiet for coaches a little bit
Absolutely.
because people are just busier. You got all the holiday parties starting to kick off right after Halloween. You got Thanksgiving, you've got Christmas, you've got the New Year's, you've got the stress of trying to get your whole life ready to go and everything in between of, these last really 2 months of the year. So it's kind of quiet for us. So I've been spending this time just working ahead on future projects and things like that. So it's been good. Let's get
Good
into
stuff, my man.
this though. Man, I enjoyed Scott. I almost want to bring him back
As
for
did
like
I.
a month straight.
You know what? Before we get into the topic for today, let me do one more thing because I do have something that I just pulled up, and this is a message from a listener of the show that just reached out after this last podcast. So I just want to give him a shout out. This is from one of our listeners of the show named Nick. So Nick, thank you very much. And he said, "Man, I just wanted to reach out and thank you for sharing your vast knowledge on the podcast Chasing Clarity. I'm an aspiring fitness coach, just getting my toes in the water, and a career firefighter." And the information I'm learning from your podcast is helping me aid people reach their goals not only on a fitness standpoint, but also on a diet awareness and overall health. There's been multiple episodes that I'll listen to 2 or even 3 times because there's so much good factual information that I want to soak up every bit of it. Thank you. You are making a difference in people's lives and you don't even realize it. So before we get into today's show, I just want to say that we truly appreciate that feedback, my man. Nick, thank you for your support and for providing us with your perception of what the show has done for you. And I'm really glad. And I know Jeff can say the same, and I'll speak for Jeff and I'll let him do it so as well. But we're really happy, honestly. When we came together, this was a passion project for both of us. We have very limited time, so him and I kind of compress an hour. I speak very fast, and one of the reasons for that is because I'm from New York. But the other reason is because really, this is like honestly, these are master classes essentially. I come from an educational standpoint, and I really do try to empower people with education, but also really we're trying to like compress like a 90-minute presentation or a 90-minute topic into 60 minutes. And that's why if you ever see or you ever notice when we have a podcast guest on like we did with Scott, that's an hour and 50-minute podcast. And that's where him and I, Jeff and I make sure that we clear out our schedule. We start hours early. I'm waking up at 2 a.m. to start my check-ins for the day because I want to make sure that I'm able to give that guest their ability, give them a platform to speak on. But we're really happy that our show has not only helping you learn more, but it's also having a positive impact on your journey and your ability to help others in their journey. So that's a huge thing. That's what I refer to as the ripple effect of coaching, as well as education in general, where by Jeff and I sharing information on this podcast platform, you're able to get benefit from it. You're able to expand your education, your knowledge, even your ability to apply things to yourself or experiment with things. But then also you're able to pass along some of the lessons that you've learned along the way to those that you work with or those in your family. And that's having a positive effect on all people. So it's almost like a domino effect where one hits over and it just knocks the whole pile down. It's so many people being impacted. So we're really happy to be able to do this. And we look forward to continuing on for a couple of hundred other episodes.
Maybe. You never know, Brandon. We might decide that we have to go to paid content and in order to beat out the AI monster that's out there. You never know. That AI stuff is fascinating, by the way.
I'll be honest with you. I've done a little bit of chat GPT. I'm not too impressed with the references they bring up. So I will stick to me going in and reading for hours onto PubMed. And I will, obviously these things are going to advance as time goes on. But I have seen, I'm going to be honest with you, and I'm not going to call anyone out by name, but there's been several influencers and several coaches and individuals in this field, and you could tell that they've looked up a topic and they've looked it up on chat gpt because I've looked at the same topics and their posts are pretty much replication copies of what they really haven't changed much of the words. They've used the same references. And what we have to realize is just because you have a reference to something, like I'm the type of person, I'm very analytical. I will go into someone's references and I will see if it actually supports their argument, and many times it does not. And that's just a disservice to what they're trying to put out because it's misinforming people, and in their mind they probably think, oh, Chappy GPT has me, but it doesn't. So I will continue to dive in deep and really learn the nuances, because the other thing with that is a lot of people are like, oh, well, we can find this on the internet, but like what happens when you're at a conference and someone asks you a question? Like anyone that's been to the conferences that I presented at, or especially the one I did an open Q&A with Alan Aragon last last January at the PEC, and it was me and him bouncing references off each other off the top of our heads. This was no looking up references. This was not looking on our phone or looking on Google or ChatGPT. Knowledge is not only your ability to look things up, it's also your ability to understand, comprehend, and then apply those things. And in the real world, when you work with clients, you can't just be Google searching answers to their questions, or you shouldn't be. And so I will take the skills that I developed over the last decade plus over any algorithm.
I think a lot of coaches overthink it. I've never had too many complex questions ever asked. Most people just kind of want to know the basics. Granted, this is depending upon the client and so forth, right? Like if you get an enhanced competitor, they want to know why taking. But I just think that's a disservice to wanting to learn lifetime in our industry, considering how much it changes. But anyway, oh well. Same thing I brought up before with you privately about what goes on in the space. So I think that will probably get worse. Let's get into this.
All right.
Individualized training program design. The importance of taking evidence-based and personalized approach to programming. A few topics we want to cover today is first one, the introduction to the topic of individualized training variables. Brandon, we're not talking about like drop sets, giant sets, compound sets, supersets, rep match, and things like that, are we?
We are not. That would be intensification techniques. And so that wouldn't be one of the main programming variables or principles, to be honest with you. That is a subset of, training approaches. But really, when we're looking to design a program, we really need to look at the main variables. And then also, we need to really look at the key principles. So things like the interaction between volume, intensity, and frequency. And really what this is going to do is this going to be an offshoot of the podcast that we had last week with Dr. Scott Stevenson. So, after last week's podcast with Dr. Scott, where we discussed the topic of response heterogeneity and individual responses to training, I had received some listener questions regarding some of the points we touched on and studies we referenced and discussed. And so what I wanted to do on this podcast was to provide a follow-up episode on that topic, essentially to expand on that topic a little bit further and then provide a greater degree of clarity on some of the things we covered, as well as some things that we didn't get the opportunity to cover because we had like 10 points to go over and we got through about two. But you know what, Scott is someone that is extremely extensive, so we get on one topic or we get on one question and he's really able to dive so deep into it that I was truly happy with what we were able to produce and the feedback that we've gotten so far. And so a lot of times when I'm asked a question, whether it be on a podcast or on a social media post that I make, the recommendations I make are based off of the body of literature on that topic and what I've seen work best for my clients on average. But just like I mentioned in last week's podcast, or last week's show, it's really important to realize that research reports averages and tells us what will work for most people most of the time. However, each individual, so every one of you guys out there, has their own unique characteristics. So some will respond better or worse to an approach, which is why it's important to be aware of response heterogeneity and also to consider it when we work with clients one-on-one, as that's what's going to allow us to get them results in the most effective and efficient manner for them possible. So it's not just about the group, it's about looking at that individual client and really helping them get to their specific goals. And so I think it's really important to acknowledge the fact that the body of scientific literature on a topic will generally point us into the right direction on how to modify programming variables such as volume, intensity, frequency, loading zones, things like rep ranges that also really go hand in hand with loading zones. But that doesn't mean that those recommendations are best for every single one of us out there. And that's where we have to combine the body of evidence with our experience. And it makes for a really essential portion or component of program design. So that's really what we're going to cover today, like some of the, what evidence-based coaching is, some of the differences in responses to different training variables, as well as training as a whole. So we'll dive into that as well. But I really want to allude to the fact that we have a lot of things that we know from the scientific literature, and we also know from our experience as coaches, but we also have to keep in mind that every single person that we work with is an N of one, meaning they are they're their own individual, they're their own person. And I know that's cliche to say, but a lot of times I think that we're in an industry where a lot of things are generalized, a lot of things are cookie cutter. People are just trying to get as many clients on the roster as possible, and they're sending out these cookie cutter programs. And I can't tell you how many times that I've done a consultation with a client coming to me, whether it be from a popular coach or just someone else, and I'm getting, over the span of 6 months, I might get 2 or 3 clients from a particular coach, and they're on the same exact program. But this is a 150-pound female just trying to, improve her health and longevity. And she's on the same program as a 200-pound male trying to optimize his hypertrophy. And it really doesn't make sense. It shows a lack of nuance and a lack of I guess, attention to detail. And so that's really, we're diving into more of these nuances. I found a benefit from them from a research perspective and being able to apply a lot of the things I've learned in practice. But I think it's really good to just increase awareness about the fact that we're all individuals. I'm not saying that every single person is a special snowflake and you need, every single thing customized to yourself. But I do think that there is a massive benefit to individualized and personalized programming.
Yeah, man, I'll be interested to kind of get into the weeds on some of that stuff because I know I've seen that some. And then also, like, if you go looking like at wellness workouts, like the volume in some of them is crazy. Like when you go looking at it, like I'm like, whoa, So then again, I'm not like very shocked when I see the things I see sometimes, right? And
Yeah,
the
it's
one thing
wild.
I have noticed is this: owning a gym, people just don't train hard. You could think they could tell you they train hard, but I promise you, like they don't. So anyway, what is true evidence-based coaching? I didn't have such a good way to volley you into this one like I did my last one, asking you a completely incorrect question. But what is true evidence-based coaching? With that being said,
No, absolutely. So I'm going to give you my opinion on true evidence-based coaching based off of what the intention of evidence-based was, or evidence-informed was meant to be. And then we'll do a compare and contrast between what people think it is and what it really is, or what it's intended to be. Because a lot of times I think that people have, I guess, a misconception of what it is. And I would really like to explain it because it's much different than you would actually, just off the name you would assume. And so I personally find that many look at the concept of evidence based practice or evidence based coaching to mean that we need to use PubMed studies to back up all of our statements. And we can only make adjustments to a program if they fit exactly in line with what the research finds. And being well versed and up to date on the research is definitely an important component needed to be evidence based or evidence informed. But coaching is both a science and an art. And being evidence based is a practice, meaning it considers and includes our experiences and anecdotes as coaches and fitness professionals. I think many look at being evidence based as like this dichotomous thing, when in reality, those who truly embody evidence based practice utilize all three components of the evidence based model that actually originated, originally from evidence based medicine. And this model, this three-pronged model, essentially includes and considers the best available research evidence from the current body of literature we have in a specific area or on a specific topic. That's the first component. The second component is we need to consider the experience, knowledge, abilities, expertise, and skills of the practitioner, which in our case is us as a coach. And then also we need to consider the goals, the abilities, the limitations, and the preferences of the individual client that we're working with, which is going to differ between each and every person that we work with. Each person is their own individual. They have their own goals, they have their own backgrounds, they have their own time constraints, their own limitations, and we have to take that into consideration when creating a program. And when it comes to being evidence-based or evidence-informed, as I kind of like referring to it, evidence-based is really the proper term, but a lot of times, if someone asks me, I'm more so evidence-informed. So I've really looked into the literature on a topic, but also I combine my own experience, my own personal anecdote for myself, as well as working with 1,000+ people at this point. And what I try to aim to do is I'm always trying to keep up to date on the research, but I try to be really selective and specific in my research interests. And I know, Jeff, you're very well aware of this because you have sent me certain studies and I've told you I have no interest in looking into them. And sometimes it's because it's petri dish data or it's rat data. And I'm not saying that we should completely dismiss those, but if I have human data and I can really get like a human, like a very applicable and ecologically valid study and really look at that first and foremost, that's always going to be my preference. And that's going to be it's going to be higher on my hierarchy. And so, for example, when I'm looking, because we're going to talk about specifically hypertrophy training, when I'm personally looking into hypertrophy training research, I usually try to look for studies where the study participants are already resistant trained rather than untrained individuals. Because at this point in my coaching career, I rarely work with anyone who has never touched a single weight in their lives. And this could include, like, they could have been away from the gym for a considerable period of time, but they have some resistance training in their background. And so if I were to develop my knowledge base on, all on studies just done on, untrained subjects, it wouldn't serve me as well, as that isn't who I'm usually working with one-on-one. And also, the results of a lot of these studies done on untrained individuals may be confounded by the fact that newbies respond to almost any type of training program due to how sensitive they are to the stimulus of resistance training. And so, when I really compare and contrast that, when I'm working with clients in the real world, many of the clients I work with have been training for years, which requires me to take a more nuanced and thought out approach to their training program design. Because I can't just throw anything that a newbie will respond to someone that's been training for years. from a volume perspective, an intensity perspective, exercise selection perspective, there's so many differences that we have to consider between someone that has literally no experience in the gym and someone that is a veteran in the gym. It's like, Jeff, if you were to take a brand new client, you wouldn't put them on the same training program you're on, having trained 2+ decades. That would make no logical sense. And some people do that. And so that's really where it comes down to individualized program design. And so approaching coaching in an evidence-informed manner is a way to bridge the gap between science and practice, as coaching should be an integrative practice where we take the principles that have been repeatedly proven to be useful in the research and combine them with our experiences, and then we need to cater them to the specific client that we're working with. So how I approach coaching clients, is essentially to use my experience, my knowledge, and expertise to give my clients what they want, but also what they need, and in an approach that they can actually do in the real world. And I think it's really important to point out that science doesn't tell us exactly what to do or how to do it. Science, or research essentially just provides us with a guideline and information on principles. But we as the coach, we have to learn how to properly apply these principles in practice. And so evidence-based shouldn't just be about research and studies, nor should be just about personal anecdote and experience. It needs to blend the two. So there is not this dichotomous relationship where you're on one side of the equation or you're on the other, because that's what we would consider like, one person on the other one side would be in the ivory tower and research, just as a science guy, and then we would have the bro coach essentially. And really we should look for a more moderate approach where we take the best from both camps and we blend it into an approach that really caters to the demographic that we work with. And so we as coaches also have to realize that adherence underpins and underlies everything. So a program can look perfect on paper, whether it be from a scientific perspective or just from a goal perspective, based on that client's specific goals. But if they can't follow through with it due to a lack of knowledge or a lack of time availability, it won't work or provide them with the true intended results, which is why since day one of the show, I've always said that my intention as a coach is to bridge the gap between research and information and practical application, as I'm not only familiar with the research and how to disseminate it, but over the last 10+ years, and this is something we could say about you as well, Jeff, like 2+ decades, we've learned how to develop the skills to help clients take research-backed principles pertaining to a variety of topics. We could talk about training, nutrition, cardio, health, and longevity, and then we help them integrate them into their daily lifestyles in a manner that meets them where they're at that present moment. Because oftentimes what's quote unquote optimal isn't practical for where a new client is coming to you at that given time point.
What is then the importance of taking an evidence-based yet individualized and personalized approach to program design? I mean, I guess my argument would be like, who are we talking to with that? Like, are we talking to, because most people I talk to off the street like don't even know how to do anything. So I'm kind of like, well, those 3 sets of this really hurt them, and you do a bunch of it. So I'm curious to see what the evidence says on that.
Yeah, it's not that taking a generic approach is going to hurt anyone, but really when it comes down to it, think about why someone hires you, regardless of their background. It is to get somewhere in a more effective manner. It is to save time. It is to get somewhere that they've never been, because they've tried it on their own, and they've tried a generic approach, or they've gotten a program from bodybuilding.com or some online training forum or an app like Train Heroic, and it hasn't worked for them. Either the program hasn't been designed properly for them, their biomechanics, their anthropometrics, things of that sort, their limb lengths, or it's that they couldn't follow through with it because they didn't have the accountability of a coach. So really, when it comes down to it, we're trying to individualize and personalize our program designs towards the individual that we're working with, regardless of their background, regardless of their starting point. Like, we're really trying to cater it to those variables to be able to make sure that we're able to lead them into a manner which we set them up for success. So I think this applies to whether you're a beginner, an intermediate, or an advanced trainee. And obviously, we have to get more detailed the further along the journey you get. But really, when it comes down to it, it could benefit everyone. So taking an evidence-based yet individualized approach to program design is important, because each and every one of our clients are going to have different goals, different genetics, different time limitations. They're going to have different backgrounds and training histories. They're going to have different, limitations from a physical perspective, maybe a different injury history, or, physical or mental limitations. They're going to have different nutritional intakes and energy, intakes, and then different lifestyle constraints. So just because a certain training program yields great results in a randomized control trial where participants are trained in the lab for each and every session doesn't mean that it's going to yield great results in the real world. And that's where we as experienced coaches need to blend both the science and the practice into our approach to program design, as we need to ensure that we align our program and our approach with that client's goals, priorities, time constraints, and their lifestyle. And this is why one of the first things I consider most when designing a new training program for a client is their schedule and their lifestyle. So personally, like one of the first things I want to know is, what's your schedule look like? Like how many days can you realistically train on a weekly basis? And how much time do you have to train per session? Because these are like the time limitations. These are practical considerations that I need to know that when I create a program, it isn't um, excessive in terms of its time constraints. Or say I have a client that tells me they can only resistance train 4 days per week, but I make a 6 day split. Like that's not going to help them. And so those are the first things we really need to consider. And so with that information, I aim to create a program that's optimal for their goals, but that's also practical for their schedule, their time availability, and their lifestyle. As we could write the perfect plan on paper, and we could essentially use all evidence-based guidelines. But if it requires a client to train 5 to 6 days per week for 90 minutes a session, but that particular client only has the availability or the time to consistently train 4 to 5 days per week for 60 minutes due to their work schedule, their personal responsibilities, their preferences, and also their family commitments, that program isn't optimal for them, nor is it individualized to them. So that's where we really got to get past that cookie cutter approach where a lot of people we see this in our industry today. Like coaches are just sending the same program to people left and right and just making it as though that should fit everyone, and it doesn't. You really need to consider the individual you're working with and all the other factors outside the gym especially. And so this is where assessing your schedule is really important, as just because you want to or you think you need to train X number of times per week doesn't mean that's will suit you best. And so this is where we need to go beyond just the X's and O's of programming in terms of the number of sets per week, the training frequency, and the intensity and rep ranges and loading zones, and consider your lifestyle. Because if you are someone, and this is what I really encounter, because this is kind of a large majority of the population I work with, these are busy working professionals, these are parents, these are people that have their own family. If you are someone that you have a high stress lifestyle, you have a busy work schedule, you have children and or a family to provide for and take care of, unfortunately have insufficient sleep quality or quantity, then it doesn't make sense to follow the training routine of your favorite bodybuilder or fitness professional who has completely different genetics than you, first and foremost, but they also don't have a quarter of the life stress or the time constraints that you have. So on today's show, we're going to talk about individual responses to resistance training. And by doing so, I hope that it opens your eyes to the fact that there are many roads that can lead to Rome, or AKA the land of gains, essentially. And just because your path and your journey may look different than someone that you follow on the internet, this doesn't mean that you should change course and start following in their footsteps. As we need to stay in our own lane, we need to focus on our own journey, and we need to work to take steps forward towards our own maximum potential, rather than worrying about what so-and-so is doing with their training, as there's massive variability in responses to different training variables. So even if you were to follow, say, your favorite bodybuilder or your favorite fitness pro's training program to a T, like you bought their program, you got their ebook, the chances of you getting the same results as them is slim to none, as that training program you see them post about or you see them advertise is designed for them, given their own data and their history, not yours. And that's really where we have to, that I really think that that's one of the benefits of one-on-one coaching, as well as in-person personal training, because this is where we're really able to cater things towards the exact person in front of us.
Mm-hmm. I actually don't think that's bad. I do small group training, so it's slightly different, but I get what you're saying. I still individualize it based upon the person who I'm seeing. Like, meaning if someone's got like a blown up back or something, I'm not like heavy
Let's
RDLs for
deadlift.
everyone. Yeah, you know.
But also at the same time, we can expand upon that. If you see someone is having limitations with their movement proficiency or their ability to execute a certain movement pattern, you'll either teach them, or so the same thing. I do this with videos. Sometimes I'll be looking over form videos, trying to help clients with cueing and things of that sort, where sometimes someone will give me feedback. And this is where a personalized program comes into play. If someone gives me feedback that a movement feels really off for them, it puts an extreme amount of discomfort from them, not from a muscular skeletal perspective, but more from like a joint perspective, a joint integrity perspective, different tissues outside of muscle. That's where I'm going to customize the program, and I'm going to swap out an exercise for something that suits them better, whether it be their anthropometric. So for instance, I just had a client, shout out to Chelsea, I know she'll be listening to this, and she has short stature. And so I put in a seated leg curl because I wanted her to be utilize a hamstring movement that was going to be in a stretch position. However, she doesn't have a seated hamstring in her gym that she can fit into. So initially I tried to manipulate the setup. So I had her pull the seat all the way up. Had to put her back pad so she would be shifted forward, but her quadricep was still not in the essentially in line with the seated leg curl so that she would actually get full knee flexion, and she would be able to get a full stretch at the top. So I just swapped that exercise out. That wasn't right for her, given the constraints of both her height, but also the exercise and the equipment availability that she had to her. So I wasn't going to tell her, I would never tell a client, you don't have this, piece of equipment, this one single piece of equipment. It's the only thing that we need in this program that you don't have, and you have to go to another gym to do that. Absolutely not. So I just customized the program and I made adjustments to her. And that's something that you're not going to get in a generic based program, because they're not going to have any considerations. It's not going to be, oh, well, this doesn't fit you. No, this is what the average person is going to be able to utilize. And this is what the program looks like. Do 3 sets of 10 on every single exercise, train 5 days a week, train with 20 sets per exercise, regardless of the body part. And it's not customized enough for people. It might get you results in the beginning when you could literally get results doing anything. But as you get more advanced, and you really want to take your results and your rate of progress to the next level, I think that's really where, whether it be one-on-one online coaching or one-on-one in-person coaching, that is where there's a benefit and there's an advantage to utilizing one of those services and working with a professional that not only programs for you, but that can give you feedback, that can help you execute things better, not only from a consistency perspective, not only give you accountability, but also from an execution perspective.
Besides, I want to say this real quick before I get in the next one about how much does muscle growth differ between individuals. Brandon, I really think you should offer a class on how to read research papers. It just popped in my head. I was like, that'd be something that'd probably be really helpful for people, especially, considering what you were saying earlier about the AI and stuff, help people out. Because I couldn't look at a study and tell you what makes one greater than the other. I could comprehend them, but I don't understand all the variables of knowing this, that, and the other thing.
I'll definitely look into that.
Yeah, no,
I appreciate the feedback.
No, I think it'd be great. As I'm just sitting here, I always hear you talk. I'm like, man, I would actually listen to you.
I would hope so, man. We're 81 episodes into this thing, so you're not listening to me at this point, man.
Fuck fruit. I hate it. I don't know why we did a podcast episode about it. It's terrible for it. But anyway, how much does muscle growth differ between individuals? A lot.
It does. And so I think anyone that has spent any amount of time in the gym training can get on board with the fact that we all respond differently to training. And if you were to look around your gym and observe different people's progress over time, you're sure to see that some people grow quicker and develop a much better physique over time, whereas there are some people that always appear to stay stagnant. And now that could be due to a variety of factors, including their genetics, their nutrition and their energy intake, their protein intake, their sleep quality, their stress levels, and many other factors. But if you've ever had a training partner and the two of you have followed the exact same training program for an extended period of time, it's not like the two of you responded exactly the same to it. And so there are always going to be outliers in training, both on the high and low side. So we're going to have people who are hyper responders to training, and then some who are, could be more so categorized as hard gainers. And that's exactly what we see in resistance training studies and in the literature, that not only does, when we look at studies that not only look at the mean responses to a specific training program, but also the ones that look at individual responses to the same training program, we see vast differences between the two. So for example, there was a study by Hubel et al. And what they did was researchers took essentially a group of almost 600 individuals, and these were both male and female participants aged 18 to 40. So it was a really good population sample for a lot of the people that are listening to this. And they had them train biceps twice per week for 12 weeks. And although each participant followed the same training program, and men and women, what they found was men and women had very similar changes, relative changes in bicep size on average. They also found massive variability between individuals. And so the majority of subjects saw an increase in biceps cross-sectional area between 15 to 20%. However, there were a few subjects that saw no muscle growth, and there were also a few that even saw a decrease in muscle growth from following a resistant trained program. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there was a small amount of participants who were hyper responders, or who we would categorize as high responders. And they saw over a 50% increase in muscle growth. And so on average, the results found that bicep cross-sectional area change seemed even across participants, regardless of their sex, and their increase in preacher curl strength was distributed evenly between men and women. So if we take males and females and we put them on the same resistance training program, we see very similar increases in relative muscle mass and muscle strength in both sexes for the majority of people. So we have to keep that in mind. But when we actually look at the individual responses, the individual data points in this study, across all study participants, we see that there are some who saw a 2% decrease in their biceps cross-sectional area, so they lost muscle, and there were also some who gained up to 59% increase in biceps cross-sectional area, so they grew like weeds. Now, a lot of people interpret these types of results to indicate that there are some individuals who are non-responders to resistance training, so it doesn't matter what they do, they're just destined not to gain muscle, which isn't the case. And so what we really have to do is tease out why is that happening, or why are we seeing the interpretation? And this is really where research interpretation and study design really comes into play. And so a lot of research has been done in the last 10 years specifically on the topic of non-responders. And much of this research finds that there are no non-responders to exercise. In a study design where all participants are put on the same generic cookie cutter program, we will see that some who, we will see some turn out to be what's considered non-responders to that specific program, but that's confounded by the fact that they were put into a training program that wasn't right for their individual characteristics. So it's not like they can't grow muscle, which is often the interpretation. It's just the training program that they were put on that was, put on, the whole entire group followed. It just wasn't designed for them, which is why I'm a huge proponent, why we've been discussing this. And I'm a big proponent of individualized training program design with clients rather than having them follow a generic program from the internet or from a group coaching platform. And so what research on this topic finds is that some individuals look like non-responders due to the fact that they require a higher dose of training or a longer duration of training to see significant changes in muscle growth. And this was seen in a 2015 study by Churchward Venn, where they put men and women on a 24-week resistance training program. And at 12 weeks, they measured their gains in lean body mass. And on average, they saw significant increases in lean body mass, but some gained far more than the average, and then some gained far less. So we had what we would consider both high responders and non-responders or low responders to this program. However, when they remeasured gains in lean body mass at the end of 24 weeks of training, they found that each participant gained more lean mass than they had to begin with, and there were also no true non-responders to the resistance training intervention. So what research finds is that true non-responders to resistance training is potentially exaggerated by the choice of measurement or the time point of measurement. So if a study only goes 6 to 8 weeks, for example, and the program wasn't right for a portion of the individuals in that study, it'll appear as though those individuals are non-responders. But this could be due to the training program not going long enough or being well suited to them. However, what we do see is that exercise non-response appears to be mitigated or essentially reversed by changing of training variables. And this could include increases in training volume, duration, and relative intensity, and the consistency in how you nail all of these programming variables. So for anyone who has followed a generic program or followed the same training system as a friend or a training partner that wasn't exactly designed for you, and you feel like you haven't made gains, don't confuse correlation with causation and think that you didn't grow because you're a complete non-responder. It could just be that the person you're training with is either more well suited to the program that you guys are following, or they have better genetics for building muscle, or another component that many overlook is the fact that they might be nailing things outside of the gym much more consistently than you are, or that the program that they're using just isn't right for you. Because if you're following a program for, say, 8 to 12 weeks and you're eating a sufficient amount of calories, you're taking an adequate protein intake, you're nailing your nutrient timing, you're sleeping well, and you're managing your stress, and you at that point, you still see no improvements in your training performance in terms of the amount of reps that you can perform with a given load or the amount of load you can lift with a movement, it's usually an indication that that program isn't right for you. And that's where you do need to look more into the nuances and look more into the details and try to either design for yourself or go to a professional and try to get a program that's more catered towards you and your individual characteristics.
Okay, so then what is an example of how individuals may respond differently to different training volumes and training frequencies? I know for me, Jay Scully used to laugh because I could literally be bombed to hell with my training volume, and I could take it, I could recover. And like you would not like my workouts. I know Brandon would not enjoy
I've
them.
been through a shoulder session with you, and I think we did 30 sets, and I was on a zero carb day. So
yeah,
I've been
it
there.
was, hey, I helped deplete the depletion. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
that's for sure, my man.
But anyway, let's get into that a little bit because I've known this a lot. Like when I was in the trenches, like some people could take it, and just some people you can just tell, like after 2 sets or something, it's like next exercise. You know what I mean? Like,
But here's
just
the
keep
thing:
going.
there's a difference between volume tolerance and ability to respond to that volume, because there's still that vector of recovery in there. So despite the fact that you can tolerate that amount of volume, I do know that you made some of your best gains in lower body by utilizing a higher frequency, lower volume approach. Am I right?
I don't disagree a little bit.
So we got it. There's people that can take it and they can take a ton of punishment. I've met so many CrossFitters or former athletes that they're doing 30, 40 sets per week, and they can continue to go back to the gym, and they're just
Yeah.
relentless individuals. I'll tell you, when I was competing, I used to train with a well-known coach. His name's Kyle Wilkes. He was a very good friend of mine, and he trained with Nick Walker. He's trained with Sebum. He's trained with a lot of very notable athletes, and he just has his mentality at that time. And I know he's shifted his stances over the years, but we used to do 40 plus sets twice per week on back, and we were hammered. I mean, this was 2 to 3 hour workouts, throwing up.
Oh yeah,
It was
those are
disgusting.
great, dude. Those are great
And it
workouts
was
growing
it was
up.
it was it was great from a mental perspective and being able to you develop mental fortitude. But I'll tell you, when I backed that down to 20 sets per week, 15 sets per week, I responded much better. And it also didn't wreck my quality of life and my ability to sleep. And so you live and you learn essentially. And so when it really comes down to how different individuals or how individuals may respond differently to different training volumes and training frequencies, this goes along the line of what we've been discussing, which is we can see a large degree of variability between people in terms of their response to resistance training, even when they're following the exact same program. However, we not only see a lot of variability between two people, so two different people, but also within the same person based on the training volume and training frequency that they use in a program. So, for example, in a study by DeMoss and colleagues, they looked at the individual muscle growth responses to high volume, higher frequency training and low volume, lower frequency training. And in this study, they used what's called a within subject design, meaning each participant was put through a high volume, higher frequency training condition and a low volume, lower frequency training condition. And to do this, what they did was they had participants train their quads with 3 sets per session, but they isolated these variables. And so they had one of their quads. And what they did was in one quad, they had them train 2 to 3 times per week for a total weekly volume of 6 to 9 sets per week. And in the other quadricep, so on the same person, their other quad was trained 5 times per week for a total weekly volume of 15 sets per week. And what's great about using this within subject design in training studies is that each participant acts as their own control because their nutrition, their calorie and their protein intake, their sleep, their stress, their lifestyle factors, they're all the same because we're testing two different variables or two different conditions in the same exact individual. So this allows us to compare how specific individuals respond to different training volumes and training frequencies with all other variables being kept the same. And the results of the study found that 1/3 of participants' quads grew the same from both training conditions, 1/3 of participants' quads grew more from the high volume, higher frequency condition, and 1/3 of participants' quads grew more from the low volume, lower frequency condition. So this study is another example of how there can be quite a large variability in how individuals respond to different training volumes and training frequencies. And this is honestly what I found with clients over the years. So I'll tell you, like personally, I've had clients who, when they initially came to me, they were doing very high volume, essentially very high volume training programs. And when I've transitioned them into lower volume programs, they've grown more due to us using more fatigue management strategies and programming in a manner where they could recover better and more adequately. And as a result, they got stronger and they gained muscle more efficiently. And then I've had clients on the other end of the spectrum who have responded better to higher volume training programs where the dose needed to make gains was higher than they were previously doing. So I had to increase volume over time to get them to continue seeing progress and making gains essentially. And so I've also found that the amount of volume a client will need to make progress can vary between different muscle groups, despite this being the exact same person. So really what I'm trying to get across is, just because someone might utilize 20 sets per week on all their muscle groups doesn't mean that that's really what each muscle group needs or will respond best to. So, for example, I have some clients who have dominant muscle groups, which are their strong points. So, for them, they can grow, those body parts can grow on as little as 6 to 8 weeks per set or 6 to 8 sets per week. Yet that same client needs 15 to 20 or even 20 plus sets per week just to see gains in other muscle groups. So at this point, my philosophy on training volume and how allocated it is that it needs to be individualized to the individual client that I'm working with, as well as to the muscle group that we're focusing on. And I look at volume as a budget. So I look at someone's weekly total volume as a budget essentially. So I usually allocate more training volume towards muscle groups that are lagging and need a greater stimulus to develop. Whereas I'll use lower volumes on their strong muscle groups, which don't need as much of a stimulus to make gains in, which allows me to maximize this stimulus we're giving them as a whole, but also manage their fatigue and recovery capacity at the same time. Because now I'm taking from Robin Peter to pay Paul. So I'm taking from if someone has a really dominant, set of legs, and this could be I have a client Jeremiah Bayer that responds very well to lower volume in his legs as long as it's higher intensity, meaning a higher relative intensity. And so his legs respond really well, but his upper body needs more volume. So I kind of bias more of his weekly training volume as well as his time towards upper body as compared to lower body. So I have him train upper body 3 times per week, whereas he trains lower body twice per week. And so this is just a way that we can allocate things in a more preferential or a more advantageous approach to be able to really customize it to the individual, what they need and what they respond best to.
Okay, so then the last one. Example of how individuals may respond differently to different loading zones and rep ranges. Now, this is something that you see always argued in the progressive overload and all this and all that. But I've always enjoyed just personally because I think a big part about working out is what you enjoy too. Like you have to mix a little bit of like the science and the research and with kind of like
Absolutely.
what am I going to sustainably enjoy doing for a long period of time, right? But I've always enjoyed the high rep stuff, especially for shoulders. My shoulders seem to just kind of respond to that, and I actually think more of my legs, which I got to talk to Joe Jeffrey about. That I'm kind of like learning how to rehab. But let's go into that. Examples of how individuals may respond differently to different loading zones, rep ranges.
Absolutely. So another aspect of training program design that can cause us to respond differently is the loading zone and rep ranges that we use within a program. So there was just a study released this past year by Carnero and colleagues, which is a great example of how, although on average trainees will respond similarly to both moderate rep and high rep training, there are always going to be individuals who will respond better to one approach over the other and who may grow better by incorporating different rep ranges into their training. So in this study, they put women into a lower body resistance training program where they trained their legs 3 times per week over the course of 24 weeks. And what they did was they divided them into 2 groups, which utilized a crossover design, meaning each participant went through each loading and repetition range condition. And so one group started the study off by training for 12 weeks in the 8 to 12 rep range, using loads around 80% of their 1 rep max, and then followed it up by training for another 12 weeks or for the final 12 weeks in the 27 to 31 rep range, using loads around 30% of 1 rep max. So they started with high load training for the first half, and then they transitioned to low load training. Then in the other group, what they did was they did the exact opposite in terms of their approach. So for the first training intervention, which was 12 weeks, they started with the 27 to 31 rep range and then switched over to the 8 to 12 rep range for the final 12 weeks. And participants throughout the entire course of the study, regardless of their loading zone or their rep range and the weeks that they were in, they trained to voluntary failure. And they also progressively overload throughout the course of the study. So once they exceeded the rep range that they had within their current load, they would increase load to keep them within that target rep range that they were aiming for. And so the results found that gains in thigh lean soft tissue mass were almost identical between high load and low load training on average for both groups. However, the advantage of this study is that it utilized a crossover design. So we were able to tell and we're able to see how well each individual did in each loading condition. And when looking at individual data points, there were pretty vast differences between the two in terms of responses. So on average, they gained between 3.5 to 4% during both 12-week training blocks. But on the individual level, they found vastly different responses between and within individuals. So some individuals responded more favorably to, or essentially, some individuals responded favorably to both conditions, meaning that they grew about the same when training with both high and low loads in those separate time periods. And then some individuals responded better to low loads, yet responded worse when switched to high loads. And then other individuals responded better to high loads and responded worse when switched to low loads. And they also found that how well someone did with high load training didn't predict how well they responded to low load training and vice versa. Now, what's really interesting is that usually when we take individuals and we put them into a training study, they grow more during the first training phase than during the second training phase. But in this study, this wasn't the case. So when we actually look at how participants responded across the study, they found that 16.7 or around 17% grew more about, grew the same in both training blocks. So they grew the same between both 12-week interventions. And then about a third of individuals, so 33.3% of participants grew more during the first 12-week training block, whereas 50% of participants grew more during the second 12-week training block, which really shows that they went from something that may had not been the best for them, best suited for them. And then when they switched, it was something that was more beneficial from a programming perspective, and they responded better as a result. So within this study, they found that both high and low responders to high load training, and they found high and low responders to low load training. And then they also found individuals who responded well to both, which is important to realize, as a lot of times when research categorizes a study, participant as being a high or low responder, it simply meant that they're a high or low responder to the training program being utilized and the variables within that. It doesn't mean that a person is a low responder to training as a whole. And this is what I've seen in practice, as I've had many individuals come to me and say that they've been training for years and they've had plateaued for a long period of time where they haven't been able to make any more gains in muscle and strength. And they essentially perceive that to mean that they've reached their maximum muscular potential. And essentially they've hit their genetic ceiling. But there's been a lot of times where I've taken many clients over the years. And what I've done is, in their mind, they think they're maxed out. And I say, listen, we're going to try a different approach than what you've been utilizing. And I'll put them on a more periodized and phasic progressive resistance training program that uses a progression method and better fatigue management strategies. And I've seen them grow a ton of tissue as a result. So I just made a post about this this past weekend. And so, an example of this is I had a client named Dimitri from Australia who I made a post about this past weekend. And when he first came to me, he was already an advanced trainee who had been training for years. He had competed. And at that point, when he came to me 2 years ago, he wasn't making gains any longer. and he was following a program from another popular training company. And although it was periodized, it just wasn't right for him as he was doing an excessive amount of training volume and seeing much smaller increases in performance. And then over the last 2 years, we've done both building and fat loss phases, but right now he's currently 37 pounds larger, or 37 pounds bigger than he was when we started our first building phase just 2 years ago. And he's still in great condition. So a good portion of that has come from the accretion of lean muscle mass. And so this is why it's, when it comes to training program design, we really need to be aware of what both the research says will work for the majority of trainees, but also be aware of the fact that every client we work with is an individual. So what works on average may not work for that client. So I think it's important to use the research and training principles that have been proven time and time over again as a starting point and as a guide. But we also need to use our experience and our skills as coaches to set a client up on a program, to track their progress and response, and then make adjustments based on their own individual response to that training program, as well as their biofeedback. So overall, if you're following a training program and making gains in both muscle and strength, keep doing it. Like, keep doing what you're doing, as there's no reason to fix something or change something, or to be constantly be making adjustments and changes if what you're doing is working. Or if you're still in the first mesocycle of a training block. So you need to give it ample time to see if it's really right for you. However, if you've been following the same training program for months on end and you aren't making any improvements, making a strategic change like an adjustment in volume, an adjustment in frequency, and or loading range and rep, or loading zone and rep range, may help you respond better. And also, if you've been doing something for quite some time, such as training in high rep ranges or just low rep ranges, and you're doing that exclusively, don't be afraid to try something new, which is often where coaching can help. As when I make a training program for a new client, I always consider what they've been doing previously and what type of training they enjoy. But I also try to program in some more novel programming variables, such as adjusting their training frequency, their exercise selection, their rep ranges, and their rest periods, to provide them with a novel stimulus and try to spur on new muscle growth. So this is where really the art and science of coaching as well as program design comes into play, because we want to take like a base template of what a client is doing and enjoys and is proficient in, what exercise they're good at doing, and then sprinkle in some novelty in terms of different exercises, different maybe movement setups, as well as rest periods, rep range, and really force them out of their comfort zone in a way that's going to help them gain more muscle and also try something that they have yet to try, and kind of get out of their comfort zone, both mentally and physically, to try to spur on new muscle growth. So this is really where taking a more evidence-based yet an individualized and personalized approach to program design is truly advantageous. And that's why, in my opinion, I believe that we see better results in coaching populations, like people that have coaches, than we do in the general population that have never had a coach.
I don't disagree with you 100% at all. I've really, really enjoyed I'm on that Kahuna's app for my team, and being able to program the exercises. And now a lot of it has videos that we uploaded. And so it's really helped be able to like watch stuff and teach people things. So it's been, there's really a lot to learn with tech and all that stuff that you as a coach could do, or you could do for yourself, like watch your form, be able to really judge, is that good form that you're taking to failure? Within what you're at, before you always ask this the question more. And I wish I could have told my younger self that, because I remember Lee Priest workouts, 28 sets for back, baby. You remember that? And I
like 20 plus sets for buys and tries.
Yeah. Oh, dude, it was wild. I just had a supercell because I'd be there all day, 2 hours for arms. But you can't lie or deny their results. It worked for them, but that's one of the cases. It worked for them. So forever as we have social media, the debate will range as far as I'm concerned. But B, man, brilliant podcast. Guys, if you have any ideas of things you'd like to hear, maybe guests you'd like to have, anything like that, let us know. We like hearing that stuff. It gives us ideas for things to plan in the future. I know B likes that, especially with a lot of the research he delves into. Myself or him is available for that. Just make sure you don't send me a voice note, because I won't listen to it.
But same here, anyway. Because ever since Chef, you started telling people not to send you voice notes, they send me voice notes. And guys, I love you. Don't get me wrong. I'm bombarded with DMs, and really my full emphasis and full focus is on my coaching clients. Everyone that knows me from an email perspective, especially from a client perspective, I'm extremely responsive. However, on the DMs, man, a lot of times, unfortunately, and I do generally try to get back to everyone in a concise manner, but there's oftentimes it goes days because it's just so many that it gets lost in the shuffle. So if you guys can avoid the voice notes for me, I'd really appreciate it. Love you guys.
100%. Guys, you guys can find me, Jeff Unbreakable Black, on IG, Relentless Forever on YouTube. B, you want to say where
Yeah,
people can find
absolutely. You guys can find me as always on Instagram, which is at Brandon DeCruz underscore, for any coaching inquiries, consultations, or anything you guys have any questions or even things regarding the show. Please email me at brandondecruzfitness@gmail.com. And also, guys, please remember to follow the show both on Spotify or iTunes. Leave a review for us. We've gotten all 5-star reviews, so let's keep that going. We do appreciate your guys' support, and then also share the episode, whether it be on your stories, even if you texted another individual. Really our mission is to be able to continue to reach more listeners and to have a positive ripple effect on our industry. As our goal is to, we've said this since day one, we're trying to bridge the gap between research and information and practical application so all of you guys can look better, feel better, and function better. So that's really our mission. If you guys could help us with that, it would be greatly appreciated.
All right. Well, guys, y'all have yourself a good one. I'll talk to you later. Peace.
Peace.